although we're short of a few people, I think we probably ought to get started. And they'll no doubt join us. So, you want to go live? Do you want to wait? Okay, off you go. You're live, thank you. Welcome, everybody. This is the Strategy and Resources Committee of Cambridge City Council. My name is Councillor Robertson, and I'm the chair. Other members of the committee, go around and introduce yourselves. Councillor Smart.
Councillor Martin Smart.
Councillor Scott.
Councillor Jocelyn Scott, representing West Chesterton. Thank you.
Councillor Simon Smith, representing Castle Ward.
Sam Carling, representing West Chesterton.
Councillor Mike Davey, representing Petersfield and Exec Council for Finance and Resources.
Cheney Payne, representing Castle Ward.
Councillor Nessinger, representing Newnham Ward and subbing for Councillor Bick.
Do we have any councillors on the team?
It doesn't appear so.
No, okay, we might be joined by Councillor Bennett later. Right, well, apologies for absence. Councillor Pick, I gather. Councillor Davies?
Councillor Herbert and Councillor Anna Smith is joining remotely.
Thank you.
And will be coming down for her item.
Thank you. I think Councillor Sweetney also is apologising. Right, declarations of interest. Anybody got a declaration of interest now, or you can do it at any point during the meeting? Councillor Davies.
I'm a member of the KIP board.
Anybody else? No? Right. Minutes of the last meeting, which was on the 30th of January, have been tabled. Anybody got any problems with them? Councillor Carling.
Yep, I'm not listed as present, although I was.
Sort that out. Anything else? Can I sign those as a correct record otherwise? Thank you, I will do that. Public questions. I saw somebody scurrying in. Senator Carpenter, are you here to speak to us? So it's Anthony Carbon, I think.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen and councillors, and thank you for your time. This question basically reads as follows. Following the cancellation of the big weekend, is Cambridge City Council willing to meet with potential sponsors and donors to see if, one, the 2023 decision can be reversed, and two, the 2024 to 28 decision can be reversed via medium-term sponsorship? Now, since I've tabled that public question, I have met with Amy Hoyland and colleagues, for which I'm incredibly grateful for her and their time. With me was Neil Vasily, the founder of the Cambridge Belt Organisation and a member of the Cambridge Chambers of Commerce, and he was the main driver behind the proposal in particular to see if Cambridge Chamber of Commerce members and other sponsors could get involved with seeing if they could provide effectively the financial contributions. My role was mainly to organise the meeting and bring parties together. Furthermore, I wanted to find out more about how the council goes about getting funding and sponsorship. With austerity in mind, I also want it minuted that in 2021, the House of Commons Levelling Up and Homes and Communities Committee concluded local government finances are unsustainable without radical reform. And in 2022, the House of Commons Public Administration and Constitutional Affairs Committee concluded that local government in England needs an overhaul. Both were rejected by ministers, so Cambridge City Council remains in a place where over 90% of its annual business rates are surrendered to HM Treasury, and I got that figure from Councillor Lewis Herbert. Yet only this week, Cambridge University boasted of a £233 million direct impact on tourism on the economy, yet they did not mention our city cannot afford to run a permanent tourist information centre. Under the current system, Cambridge Ahead's Youth Advisory Committee's ambition to become the world's greatest small city has no chance of being achieved as we are run like a large market town. Our city deserves better. So really what I wanted to get across there, in particular to the private organisations and the firms that are really making their money from our city, is to contribute to the civic events. And I wonder if the council in particular could hold a debate or think further, in particular how to get large civic figures such as the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge involved in persuading those firms that it's not just science and technology they're investing in, it's the whole city that they need to be responsible for. Thank you.
Very good on time, 3 minutes that we've got. Councillor Davies, do you want to try and answer that?
Yes, although I see we've also been joined by Councillor Smith, so Anna might want to also chip in. If I start off, Anthony, thank you for the question. There's an awful lot there, ranging from the big weekend through to sponsorship, through to how we work with companies across the city. And as ever, I'm grateful for your role facilitating that discussion. If I take the big weekend first, as I'm sure you'll be aware, we've attempted to gain sponsors for the big weekend over the course of the last year and 2 years through the very excellent work of Councillor Collis. That to date has proved unsuccessful, but in specific terms, I am absolutely sure Councillor Collis would be delighted to meet with the Chamber of Commerce to look and explore ways in which the funding for the big weekend might both come in this year, although that might be too late, being honest, but certainly for future years. And I'm sure that outside this meeting, if you contact myself, Councillor Smith, Councillor Anna Smith, and Alex, we can make sure there's some sort of meeting set up with the Chamber of Commerce. And within that, therefore, very grateful that they've approached you with a view to seeing how we move forward on this, because it's proved problematic for us in the past. With regards to your more general comments on local government funding, as you can probably guess from where I'm sitting, I wouldn't dare to disagree with you. Clearly, we believe that there's more we should be getting from central government into local government, given that over the last 10 years, funding has gone down increasingly over the course of that period of time. We do work very closely already with Cambridge Ahead. As I'm sure you're aware, we meet with them on a monthly, Councillor Anna Smith and I meet with them on a monthly basis. We're also involved in other programmes like Innovate Cambridge, which Councillor Alex Gilderdale and I have met with representatives of them. So, as I say, we would be keen to look, and I think perhaps the last thing I'd say before, if it's possible to hand over to Councillor Anna Smith, is that I think we believe that our role is probably to facilitate and to influence rather than necessarily bring funding in. So any work we can do to make Cambridge the best small city in the world is always welcome. And I think that's a priority for us at all levels within the executive. But thank you, Anthony. I'll pause there in case Anna Smith wants to add anything to what I've said.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Councillor Davey. And you've covered off a few of the points that I might have raised, so I won't bother repeating those. I will obviously want to emphasise again, yes, if you're speaking to people who have said that they will be happy to cover the cost of the big weekend, we'd love to hear from them. Because the efforts to get sponsorship go back many years, and sometimes sponsorship is easier to find than others. And as it stands at the moment, it simply was not possible to fund the cost of that through sponsorship. So if you are in touch with people, that's great to hear, and we'd love you to put them in touch with us. The other thing that I don't know if you've come across, because it's some really exciting work that I think hasn't probably as yet had the kind of public interest that, or the public exposure that it deserves in the long term, is some of the work that's currently being done on social impact investment in the city. I think this is really very exciting. You know, when you look back 5 or 6 years, you have companies coming forward and they want to get involved, And they want to help people contribute. And it's one of the many reasons why people come to live and work in Cambridge, is because it's an ethical city. And that's a real attraction to a lot of people that choose to make their careers here. And maybe the options were very much, well, you can have a fundraising drive or people can come and do litter picking. And both of those things are obviously great. But when you consider all the skills that go into those businesses, it would be great to really take advantage of some of those. Now, this was work that started before the pandemic in terms of thinking how we could work more closely with those organisations that are really keen to be part of the work that can happen in the city and to work in partnership with the city. One of the things that we're now looking at, and I'm happy to share with you after the meeting, the link to this, because there's a report that's now out on the web, is entitled Coming Together, the Role that Social Impact Investing Can Play in Cambridge. And it's very much thinking about how we can work in real genuine partnership with organisations and indeed individuals who may wish to bring money and expertise, and how we can put them in touch with people that would be happy to take advantage is the wrong word, you know what I mean, to take part in kind of using that money and that expertise for social good. So I'll send you some details of that. It's some really exciting work. I think it's exactly the kind of thing that you're talking about, and it's something that's very much on the radar. Just to finish off, I would absolutely echo what Councillor Davey is saying. You're not going to hear anyone, I think, in this chamber complain about a question that calls on the government to do its bit to properly fund local government. It's absolutely appalling the way that local government is currently funded. It can't continue. There must be a proper, fairer funding, which gives us the money and the powers to do what we can and what we are willing to do for our residents, because at the moment we are so constrained by not only the amount of funds we get, but the way that that funding is often ring-fenced or put into kind of almost like beauty contests where everyone's fighting each other for a small pot of money. And I don't think that's the way that we should be funding local government. So I'll wind that up there. Very happy to share that information with you.
Mr. Carlton, do you want to ask a further question?
Yes, thank you, Chair. One of the things Mr. Vasily asked me to mention, and I think this was something that was one of the reasons I think why we were both frustrated, was we offered a number of kind of like free services in effect, and he was saying that a couple of high-profile people in the tech world, he named Hannah Chelkowski and his son Sam Vasily, who now works for what was Facebook, were willing to assist. And we also saw an example of one of the brochures that the council had trying to reach out to firms to help sponsor the Cambridge Folk Festival as well. And I think certainly with the latter, that's something that we can collectively as a city look at again in terms of how we are pitching these things to firms. I mean, personally, I would like to see something that the Cambridge Land Justice campaign said, change the consciousness of our city so that firms and the colleges in particular change their cultures and constitutions so they take into account the whole of the city and not just their own members. It also seemed that there was kind of an impasse in terms of who needs what information and who was available to give what information. For example, how much does it cost to sponsor a beer tent? How much does it cost to sponsor the main stage? What's commercial in confidence and what isn't? Finally, I was particularly disappointed with the response from the Secretary of State regarding those two parliamentary reports, because he's rejected both of them. And I just think that's astonishing and is something that actually the council as an institution may want to take issue with, because otherwise we are just going to go around in circles and so much of our business rate funding is just going to be surrendered. Thank you.
Impeccable timing again, 2 minutes. Do you want to respond, Annie?
I think just to say, noted, there's some feedback you've given there. I'll make sure that's passed on to the right people. And again, in absolute agreement that the government needs to do better. Again, you're not going to hear me arguing with that. But in terms of your feedback on sponsors coming forward for different events. Definitely happy to pass that feedback on.
Right, thank you very much. We move on to item 5, the general fund revenue carry forwards on page 25. I think Caroline Weber, you're going to introduce this item for us. Could you introduce yourself?
Thank you, Chair. Caroline Reber, I'm Head of Finance. This report asking for approval in principle to carry forward unspent budget from 22-23 into 2023-24. This is budget that was provided to do work in the current year that has not been completed, and therefore there is the request to carry that budget forward. These are provisional amounts. Final amounts for carry forward will be reported to this committee in July with the outturn report. But in the meantime, approval in principle will give officers the authority to continue to deliver this work with the assurance that there has been some approval of budget carry forward. So the appendix to the report lists those provisional carry forward requests with a total of 351,000. And this is all general fund monies. I'm happy to take any questions.
Right, anybody wish to ask a question about the item? Councillor Scott.
Oh, sorry, can't see. Thank you for a very brief oral report and a comprehensive written report. I'm just wondering, because I think that residents would be interested to know, why were the funds actually not spent in the year for which they were budgeted? I know you won't be able to answer in relation to every single item, but some indication to residents I think would be appreciated. Thank you.
Yes, I think I would refer first to the appendix to the report, which goes through each individual item, and some will have justification of why. In many cases, it's simply a slippage. In other cases, it may be that, for example, if there was a recruitment involved, it may not have been possible to recruit the officer to do the work on the timescales. So it'll be a variety of reasons, but it will often be timing.
Thank you, that's appreciated.
Councillor Carling.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so just in the appendix of the report, on the item that's 1758, the lower down one, looking at other commercial properties, I was just interested to see that part of the report says there have been delays by the university bringing this forward, and I just wondered if that's something we see likely to continue or whether that's likely to be resolved soon, and just kind of what's going on with that.
I can hand over to Dave Prinsep to answer that one.
When the university were looking at Mill Lane redevelopment proposals, we were having early discussions with them as to how that might be incorporated with their wider scheme, and that's gone quiet at the moment, so they haven't progressed that at the moment. We were seeing if a better outcome would be to work with them to get that whole area master planned, but that's gone quiet at the moment. I believe they do still have plans to proceed, but it's relatively slow at the moment.
Okay, any further questions? No? Okay, well, I'll turn to recommendations on page 26. Can I see all those in favour of those recommendations?
Sure.
Councillor Bennett has joined us, but she can't vote anyway because she's not on in the room.
Correct.
Okay. No doubt she will ask if she wants to speak. No. Right, let's move on to item 6. Oh, sorry, I have to ask, Councillor. How could I forget? Executive Councillor Davey, what do you think about that item?
I will take it forward. Thank you.
Right, item 6. Moving on to item 6, a review of general asset management plan on page 31. Dave Prinsep, are you able to present that, please?
Good evening all. This is a joint report by myself and Lynn Bradley. So I'm the Head of Property Services. My role is really the overall approach to asset management, and Lynn's role is the a focus on repair and maintenance aspects of the of delivering for the assets. That's the improvement of them, refurbishment, repairs, and general compliance. Is my microphone making an awful echo? No. We have an existing asset management plan that was introduced in 2019 and approved by this committee. That was very much focused on commercial property, and it did cover some aspects of other general fund property, but we recognised that we needed a new plan to reflect both the incorporation of the wider portfolio, but also some of the changes that happened since we did that review. There's quite a lot happened since then with COVID and how we use some of our assets. There's been an awful lot of change over that period of time. We've sold some assets, we've acquired some new assets, so there's a lot of review that was needed in order to come up with a new asset management plan. If you look at page 32, 3.3 to 3.6, that sets out some of the changes that we've seen over that period of time. The Council's also adopted the net zero carbon target for its building in the greenhouse gas report. And the other factor we have to reflect a moment is the government's minimum energy efficiency standard set for commercial property and property that we lease. And again, in the report on page 33, 3.7 to 3.12, that sets out some of those policy targets and legislative targets, as well as our current performance. So on page 33, there's a graph there showing the Council's total emissions at the moment and how that's changed over time. And then in 3.12 on page 34, it shows the current Council property performance in respect of environmental performance certificates from an A to a G. That's a bit like the stickers you get on fridges and things, showing how that performs. And that is shown by the percentage in each of those areas per square metre. So the asset management plan is there to set out how it's going to manage our general property assets over time. And if you look in the asset management plan, it's fairly detailed, setting out how we will do that. Again, page 34 onwards sets out the approach taken, and there's a table in 3.16 in terms of how we intend to prioritise our improvements to property in respect of environmental performance. We've identified how we can prioritise those properties depending on how they perform. So we've got a split of priorities there, depending whether the property comes under the greenhouse gas report or the minimum energy efficiency standards, which is the environmental performance certificates. In terms of how we can meet those requirements, really the general approaches are going to be retrofit of existing buildings. So that would be the starting point for many properties. If we're retaining them longer term, we go and retrofit them and improve the standard. The other option could be redevelopment or a new build in respect to those properties. And again, as we do that process, we raise the standard required as we're building those. Or finally, it could be a disposal or rationalisation of the property as to how we'll meet that. So in respect of the table at the end of the asset management report, in Appendix A, we have all of the properties listed there with the respective priorities shown as part of that process. And part of the asset management work that we undertake is to look at each of those properties and decide what the longer term use of those properties will be to determine what work we need to do now as to whether we'll fit within that retrofit category, redevelopment category, or perhaps a disposal category. The report also sets out the timelines we're working to in respect of the works to get to net zero carbon or MEES compliance. It's quite a big piece of work. If you look at the number of properties we have to work with, the approach we're taking is on page 35 in 3.17 of the report. And the general approach we're taking is to do a report in one financial year, identify what works are required in respect of each particular property, and then do the work in the subsequent financial report to do that for each of the priorities through to 2030 to make sure we can comply with those requirements. It is an awful lot of work, and we will need more staff to help deliver that, or possibly look at alternative ways of delivering that work, such as through frameworks or using external consultants to support us with that. The other thing that we just pick up on in the report is the future changes to the senior management structure and the groupings within the council, and this should actually bring together various teams that will improve the approach towards asset management and delivering this. So there will be some changes that help improve that. And then finally, we have the recommendations. 2.1.1 is to approve the asset management plan as attached to Appendix A, and I hope that's fairly self-explanatory as a document. And then 2.1.2 is to approve the approach we've set out in respect of the works for funding and the delivery to meet those targets by 2030. It's a challenging target. It's certainly something we set out we see as beneficial to do as a council, and I think taking a phased approach this way will help us to deliver that, rather than trying to do too much up front and then just getting bogged down and not making progress we'd like to. So that's an overview of the report, and if anybody has some questions, happy to answer them.
Thank you. Questions? Councillor Netzinger.
Thank you. It's a fascinating report, and I agree that it is needed because it's reviewing the assets of the council is very important, and I think it's appropriate that the council's priorities need to be reviewed, particularly in the light of the climate emergency, which only becomes more urgent every year. I was particularly interested, looking at this report, to think about what the council's largest, which buildings the council owns have the largest carbon footprint. And the table on page 77 is very, very clear about that, in that it is, perhaps not surprisingly, Parkside Pool, which is in a league all of its own in terms of its carbon footprint. That isn't necessarily a surprise, given the needs of a swimming pool. But it does make me think that within your priority one buildings, if tackling climate change is a key priority for this council, then that site ought to be a high priority as well. It also is not... my other thought about this is that it's right next door to the Queen Anne Terrace car park. And there's been quite a lot of discussion in this chamber about whether the council is taking as much of a proactive view on redeveloping its car parks as perhaps should be the case. The proximity of those two buildings and the extreme nature of the carbon impact of the pool does make me feel that maybe that should be one of your higher priority projects. And I just wondered whether that was a view shared by either the officers or the members of the council.
Before you answer, I just want to ask Andrew Lim if he wanted to ask or make a contribution about this item, this particular building.
Yes, I can answer that specific point unless Dave wants to go first on it.
Let's go first. So some of the data in here, by nature, is historic, and so Andrew can explain some of the changes that his team have done on Parkside and also district heating that will probably provide a bit more clarity. Andrew, do you want to add anything?
So through you, Chair, in answer to Councillor Netzinger's absolutely valid and helpful point, Parkside Pool has historically been by far our biggest single emitter, and that's why we prioritised preparing a project for it that we were then able to kind of submit a successful bid to the Public Sector Decarbonisation Fund a couple of years ago, and that work was completed last summer. So the data we've got about emissions doesn't reflect those works yet, but of the £1.7 million we were successful in securing, a lot of that went to Parkside, some to Abbey as well. So I'm expecting to see a fairly significant reduction in the emissions from Parkside when we get the next full year's data. which should be available for our October Committee Report of Environment and Community Scrutiny Committee. They won't be dropping down, to kind of zero, but there's a fair chunk taken out of them through the work we've already done through renewable energy and other energy efficiency measures to Parkside last year, as I say. So that doesn't come through in the data. As Dave mentioned there, the district heat kind of scheme that we're currently exploring the feasibility of, if that does prove to be feasible, and if it also then proves to be fundable, that would be the next kind of major step in decarbonising Parkside, because we've kind of gone most of the way that you can with normal measures, I think. So I hope that gives some explanation as to kind of why we have been prioritising Parkside and have done a lot of work on it and have a kind of a plan at least for how we would go further.
Fiona, you wanted to make a contribution?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just to pick up the point on Queen Anne Terrace, as you mentioned, we do have a programme of looking at car parks in line with the projects and proposals that may be coming forward on transport more generally within the city, but also we have a leasehold, the Kelsey Carriage facility is actually leasehold, and we need to take that into account, as well as the resources we have to bring forward proposals on any given site within the city. So it is in a pipeline list, but we need to take account of all of the other things going on and the timing for when it's possible to bring it forward.
So David's on this.
Yes.
Yes, do go ahead.
Because Councillor Nessinger asked about the political will for this. There is political will to do this, particularly if, as Andrew has indicated, there is a desire to put in a heat source pump as part of the Parkside, because it would make sense to do it all at one time, and therefore I would obviously be discussing with Fiona and others about how we might rejig the programme accordingly.
Yes, Councillor Nessinger.
Thank you. Enormously helpful answers, so thank you very much indeed. It will be fascinating to see how much the investment that's gone into Parkside does actually reduce that fairly astronomical cost, and it's very, very good to know that that work has been done, and I will, I hope, find time in the autumn to look at those figures. But I think the point that Councillor Davey came back with at the end is absolutely critical, that actually if the next step is going to be district heating, it would be really, really sensible to do it all at once and to think about the future of the car park at the same time. So I'm very reassured to hear that that is the intention. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just going to take Councillor Bennett next, because she's put her hand up online some time ago. Councillor Bennett.
Thank you very much, Chair. I also wish to speak very briefly about pools. Because we have the Abbey Pool complex in my ward, and the Green councillors want to say that we really welcome the holistic approach that's being taken to the Abbey Pool's refresh, in that it doesn't just cover the pools themselves, but the surrounding parks and leisure facilities. And we hope that this will increase footfall to Abbey Pools again, and bring it up to pre-pandemic levels, because it's not just about the overall emissions and costs, but it's also about the costs and emissions per swim. And anything that gets the footfall up makes it more affordable for my residents. So I welcome this report, and I will just shut up.
Thank you. Councillor Smith.
Yes. They are in Appendix B. These buildings are listed priority 1 because they're the top priorities, and they include other buildings as well as the Parkside and Abbey pools. There's been a government funding allocation to investigate the feasibility of a heat network for the city centre, which could cover most of these buildings. And that has to be part of the scale of the ambition if we're to be a zero carbon council by 2030. So it's a substantial piece of work. Of course, it is predicated on the assumption that the whole of the electricity grid is powered. not by gas, as a large proportion of it currently is, but sometime in the future before that can be fully realised. But it's a huge step to take. When you look at the profile of the reduction in carbon emissions by the council, the easy yards have been taken, not the hard yards. And that's what we've got in front of us now. And we can't delay on this because as time goes on, all these kinds of work, there'll be more and more people wanting, more and more organisations wanting this work. It'll become more and more expensive. It'll hit supply side problems. We need to get on with it.
Thank you. Answer that. No. Councillor Scott.
Thank you. I'd just like to refer to paragraph 3.3, paragraph 4, and then to the appendix page 16, which is also page 58 of the substantive papers. At 3.3, the acknowledgement is made that the shift in working arrangements as a consequence of COVID-19 has led to surplus in office accommodation or buildings. And then at paragraph 4, that refers to the financial implications. And then in the appendix at 6, page 16 or page 58, there is reference to office accommodation. And I'm just wondering what is being undertaken, or what results have come, or what prospects are there, because there'll be a surplus of office accommodation generally, not just with the council. So what is intended to be done with this surplus accommodation, one? And number two, what financial implications are there of surplus accommodation we can't divest the council of for continuing upkeep, and also the environmental implications, because empty accommodation, empty office space does deteriorate really rapidly, which means that we would have to at least devote some resources to its upkeep. And then, as I said, there's the issue about the environmental implications. Do we undertake environmental improvement steps for office accommodation or other buildings that are not occupied whilst we endeavour to find uses for them or find alternative purchases? Thank you.
Did you understand where those references were to? Because I didn't. Which paragraphs were you referring to?
We're referring to paragraph 3.3, where the...
3.3 and 4.
Yes.
Of which, of the report or the plan?
Well, it's in the review of General Fund Asset Management Plan, which we're on. That is agenda item 6.
The review document, not the plan itself.
No, it's the item that we're on at the present time. Agenda item 6, paragraph 3.3, there's the reference to the fact that there's been a significant shift in how we work and use of administrative office space, resulting in substantial over-provision. Then paragraph 4 is simply, I refer to that because that's talking about the financial implications. And then at page 58, which is page 16 of the appendix, there is reference to office space and so forth. But my question simply is, well, I'll put it this way, are we confident that we can make use of that or the surplus office space, number one? Number two, if we're not confident that we can make use of it, do we have some alternative ways in which we can find purchases so that we don't hold on to that surplus property? And number three, if we have to hold on to surplus property and we can't find alternative uses, then that's going to have implications for upkeep, because if we don't upkeep empty accommodation, we know it deteriorates very quickly. Therefore, what implications does that have for the expenses related to upkeep, and one, or A, and B, the environmental implications, because we're taking steps in relation to our properties from an environmental perspective. If it's surplus
Okay,
property and
I
we're
think
not
we got
using
that.
it, then what do we do? Do we undertake the environmental steps or do we not do that? Thank you.
Dave, would you want to answer that? Thank you.
Yeah, so in relation to our office accommodation, we brought reports to this committee in, I think it was October last year, setting out our approach. There is still demand in Cambridge for office space and other types of space. It's still very buoyant compared to other places in the UK. But we recognise we do have a surplus of office accommodation. From a staff perspective, we've based our staff primarily at Mandela House since COVID, and that is filling up more than it has in the past, so definitely more people are coming back in, but it's still not fully utilised. In respect to this building, we recognise that we had a surplus space, and that anything we do in respect to this building, be it refurbishment or something of that nature, was going to take time. So one of the things we've done is obviously getting Alia on the ground floor, letting it to Alia, and then managing that space and using that space for start-up businesses, charities, social enterprises. So that's a really good use of space, contributing to our overhead costs in respect to the building. As part of the office accommodation approach, we're looking at rationalising the space we have, and I think we'll probably need 30 to 40% of the space we've had historically for staff. In terms of that space, we need to lose that space somehow. Obviously, we'll focus here. It will be looking at how we use the space in this building to generate income streams and contribute to the use of the building. I think from an environmental perspective, it's not just about the building per se, it's about the utilisation of building. It's been like the comment about the swimming. The more people swimming, the more benefit there is. So we want to make sure we're using our spaces effectively and well, using other people. So if we have meeting space that can be used by other organisations, we want them coming here and using our space instead of over-providing meeting space in the city centre. So it's all those aspects we need to be looking at, how we use our space differently. But inevitably will be something like Mandela House, looking at how we use that space differently in the future when we relocate back to the Guildhall, as set out in the October report. That will be based on refurbishing this building and making it fit for purpose, and the underlying principles of asset management generally, getting it functional and fit for purpose for people even based here. So I think staff will want to come here, but I want to use the building very differently from how they used it pre-COVID. So more collaboration space, probably coming in more for meetings, but working remotely the rest of the time. So all those things are part of that office accommodation plan we're now working on and developing as we move forward. So we now have a project team who are working with me on that. And we're also looking at how other local authorities are delivering this. So we're going to do some visits of other places to see how they're using their space differently, learn some lessons from what's gone well for them and how they're utilising alternative space. And that has been a mix of community space, cultural space. Lots of places have taken a similar approach to us with Alia, with incubation, start-up business type spaces. So it's finding a way to make that void space, that empty space, pay its way and generate good contributions towards our costs and overheads. Environmentally, that will have to come from the improvements to the building and refurbishment of the buildings. One of the things in respect to the Guildhall, for example, district heat network is quite important in that context. It's quite a difficult building to actually improve the performance of the building without something of that nature, just because it's a bit of a landlocked site. So you haven't got the opportunity to do things like ground source heat pumps. We've got solar on the roof here, but probably not enough room for a building this size to air source heat pumps. So part of this process is finding ways of how we improve a listed building like this and make it perform and deliver how we want it to, both to produce the environmental savings, but also generate finance for those spaces we don't utilise. And I think historically with this building, we had restaurants come in, so we found ways of making that space pay, and it's moving that forward again in respect to this building to make sure we can utilise that space effectively and efficiently.
Thank you.
Councillor Davey.
On Councillor Scott's point, I think it's important that we keep our eye on this, and obviously I get briefed on a regular basis by Dave, but I think it's important we do bring back regular reports to ensure that the use of office is done as effectively as possible. So I'll undertake that committee that obviously Dave and I will talk about. A second, more general point, if I may, Chair, it's just to welcome the report. Thank you very much, Dave and to Lynn, for all your work on this. I found, like Councillor Nessick said earlier, I found this incredibly valuable, and I'm sure it will inform our work going forward in what is really a really important part. So thank you to both. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Bennett, you wanted to contribute from afar?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I should have raised this point earlier when I spoke. I forgot to. And it's regarding the shops on the commercial portfolio. And obviously, I'm particularly interested in those that are in my ward, and particularly Ditton Lane shops, which are down in the priority 2 list. And my question is, my main concern on these shops is not so much about emissions, but on the access, which is unsatisfactory, and upon crime prevention. I understand the tenants feel the Ditton Lane shops in particular are very vulnerable to crime, and I get a lot of complaints from residents about the access to those Ditton Lane shops. And my request would be that if any refurbishment of those shops is being considered, that access and crime prevention are considered at the same time.
I suppose they're that different from the rest of the city, but anyway, would you be able to answer that, David?
When we do the reviews of the property, that's one of the aspects we do consider with the teams. And certainly if we do look at refurbishment, those type of things, access would be one of the key parts of that. Same with ops combination as well, we look at those opportunities to make sure we're improving and getting those things compliant as best they can be.
Councillor Bennett? No, okay, she's gone. Councillor Scott?
I'm really sorry I didn't raise this earlier, but I thank Councillor Bennett because it's come to mind. A resident was in touch about a shop in Arbury Court, and I do just want to put on record that we know that apparently the pharmacy is going, and could the council take steps to secure another pharmacy but in a larger space, because part of the reason that the resident believes that the pharmacy is going is because of the space they had. I'm sorry to be so particular, but the resident did specifically ask me to raise it. Thank you for the indulgence.
Not quite the right time to raise it, but do you wish to provide an answer, David, or take it offline?
Could you just speak to me afterwards and I'll get the details of the issue and then we can try and address that?
Thank you. It was Councillor Bennett raised it, so I took advantage.
Thank you. Any further questions? No? All right, well, I take you back to the recommendations on page 32 to approve the plan and the approach of the works. I see all those in favour, please show.
That's unanimous, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Davey, would you accept that?
Accept that, Chair.
Thank you. Right, move on to item 7, which is the update on the 4-day week trial in the Greater Cambridge Shared Planning Service. And I think we have a visitor from South Campus to make your presentation. Thank you. Please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and good evening, members. It's nice to see you all again. I'll be very brief because I think the report is self-explanatory. It includes data for the first 2 months of the trial, so that's January and February data. And as you know, we're measuring 2 things, key performance indicators and health and well-being. So the data included in this report has January and February key performance indicators at Appendix 1 and the high-level check-in survey at Appendix 2. Both sets of data are very much a work in progress, and the full data that will be analysed on the whole January to March quarter will be analysed by the Bennett Institute for Public Policy,
in April. And we will also have a much more detailed health and wellbeing survey that's being launched this week and will run for 3 weeks, which will compare health and wellbeing of colleagues now with health and wellbeing of colleagues before the trial was announced. In 3.11, you can see I'm asking for guidance about how you want to make the decision about whether you would like to extend the trial for a year. Obviously, that's premature because we don't have the data, but it would be good to understand the process by which the City Council would like to proceed on making that decision. And just to remind you that there are 2 roundtables for Cambridge City Council members next Monday evening. Both are being run by the Bennett Institute. I think we've had a good sign up for both of them. Excuse me, but in case you can't attend, there is going to be a member survey that's going to be sent out so that you can at least give written feedback if you're not able to attend the roundtables. Those will be, just for clarity, there won't be any council staff in those apart from a member of staff who's taking some notes, so those will be completely independent. And just to flag that we're still analysing all of the data for the second trial for the shared waste service. I believe you had an update at this council last week, and we're still undergoing data analysis there. That's all I have to update you on, Chair, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Robert, do you wish to make any contribution at this stage?
I think this has covered it all, Chair. Excuse me, yep. I'm fine.
Right, open it up for questions then. Any questions? Councillor Payne.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report. It's really interesting, and I think it's really encouraging generally to see the tables you put in response to the staff surveys, and it looks very clearly like it's going incredibly well and it's being really well received. I was wondering whether you have anything similar to compare to from before the 4-day trial. Is that an improvement, or is it just that your staff are very, very happy anyway? Which is a good thing.
Would you like me to go one by one, Chair? Do you want me to answer that now?
Please answer.
Thank you, through you, Chair. So, sorry, I've got a bit of a frog in my throat. The data that you've got in Appendix 2 there is very much a sort of testing the temperature of the organisation as we went through the trial. It's not in any way comparative to the data that we'll be collecting in the health and wellbeing survey. So what we wanted to do during the trial was make sure that nothing was going, nothing was concerning for staff, for colleagues. And that pulse survey, it takes sort of 90 seconds to fill it in. And people can, there's also a free text box. So actually it's through the free text that we've picked up any issues that there have been and addressed those as we've gone through the trial. But the data that we'll be using to measure health and wellbeing is a survey run by Robertson Cooper, which is an external company. It's a 120 question survey, and we've actually added on about a dozen questions on the experience of the 4-day week. And as I mentioned, we'll be launching that survey later this week, and it will be open for 3 weeks. So we'll have directly comparable data from August before the trial was announced, and at the end of the trial. But our staff are very happy, as I'm sure Robert's are too.
Councillor Netzinger.
Thank you. It is a very interesting trial, and I think lots of us will be fascinated to see what the outcome is. The current picture seems to be that it is, for those desk-based staff, being a good outcome for them, and that the KPIs are indicating that it's not having a terrible impact on the council. That doesn't feel like an enormously surprising outcome for me. And actually my biggest worry about this trial has always been not the impact on the staff who were undergoing the trial, but on those who were not able to. So I think it's the work that's being done on the shared waste programme is very interesting, and it will be very good to see what it is possible to achieve in that space. But there are other staff in this council and in your council, I'm sure, who are neither desk-based nor part of the shared waste service. So my question really is, are you planning to look at the impact of the trial on them and their sense of satisfaction at work and their feelings about the trial, as well as those who are part of it.
You go ahead.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. Absolutely, we are. We've got surveys coming out of our ears in South Cambridgeshire. So there's a survey that's specific for people who were not in the trial to ask them what was the impact of other people being in the trial on their work, their experience at work, not dissimilar to the member survey that we're doing. So we're definitely capturing that information from people who weren't in the trial. We actually don't, apart from waste, we actually don't have that many people who weren't in the trial because we don't run parks and leisure centres like the City Council does. So there's a small cohort of people outside of waste who weren't in the trial, but we're certainly asking them for their feedback because it's really important to understand, you know, it's no good the trial working if it has a negative knock-on impact on others, because even if it wasn't people in South Cambridgeshire, for example, it might be people in our partner organisations.
Okay, Councillor Smart.
Yes. So the anecdotal evidence I've come across as a councillor with staff is that they're not managing to do their work in 4 days necessarily, especially people in management roles. Got a couple of points here. So in terms of residents, so employee health and well-being and stuff is very important, but as a councillor I'm also concerned with residents. So employee wages are paid by residents from the council tax they pay. There's continuing cost of living crisis. Residents are struggling to pay their rent and mortgages, utility bills, food and other costs. So is it fair that they're being asked to pay for our staff to have an effective pay increase of 25% when our residents are struggling on with smaller increases or no increase at all? In terms of the plan, so the council has shared services with South Cambs Council. So when South Cambridgeshire chose to take a trial of 4-day week for 3 months, we joined in. I understand we weren't asked about this. So we are now talking about a further trial of a year. Cambridge City Council is now expected to follow the trial for a further year. So when does a trial stop being a trial? I know the answer is at the end of the year, but when does normal stop being a trial? So if employees have been doing a 4-day week for 1 year and 3 months, then that's normal. So if we go back to a 5-day week, then that's a big effective pay cut of 20% and then a very unsettling change for staff. So that's one aspect of this sort of thing going forward. And I've said before, when I've sort of hopefully been a critical friend to you, Liz, that I'm just concerned about the future and how the plan will play out as the years or months and years go by. And just as an aside, with the thing about the shared waste service, which is obviously a challenge, I think, I mean, I'm not the executive councillor for waste or anything, but I think that we ought to really work at making that, if we're going to do that, we ought to try to change the way we do things so that it can work in 4 days. So, for example, in Bristol, where I come from, they had a thing where you sort of slim your bin, and there's sort of bits of tape around the bins to make the people have less waste. I think that it might, and I didn't approve of that, by the way, I don't approve of the use of the word slim, I think it's the wrong word to use. But anyway, I think the idea of trying to get residents to not necessarily put their bin out if it's not empty, if it's not full rather, then that will be a good plan, and maybe we can help to achieve the outcome that we want, which is that this waste service can collect the bins in 4 days. Thank you, Chair.
To answer that, please.
Thank you, Councillor Smart, for your questions. And through you, Chair. In terms of the impact on residents and is it fair, the main driver behind trialling the 4-day week was about our concerns around recruitment. But a knock-on from that concern was about cost and disruption. So you'll know from the planning service that there have been times when the planning service have carried significant numbers of agency staff who are both very expensive, but also, and this isn't meant to be personally aimed at them, very disruptive because the turnover is quite high And so cases, planning application cases quite often can get handed on from one person to another. So South Cambridgeshire Council, when we started the trial, up to that, the year before, was carrying £2 million of agency costs. And while we would never expect to get rid of all agency costs, because sometimes you just need to employ people on a short-term basis, we could reasonably expect to get rid of some of those costs and therefore reduce the cost of services for our taxpayers. So I think from that perspective, it's in the council's interest to see whether we can make those sorts of savings and efficiencies rather than the more difficult savings efficiencies, which are around, cutting services or reducing services. So that's, I guess, how I would respond to your first question. In terms of the extended trial, no decisions at all have been made. So we're not expecting you to follow anything. We're going to be presenting data to you and to the Cabinet, South Cambridgeshire District Council, and both will be able to make a decision on the basis of the data and the evidence. The issue, as I mentioned, recruitment is kind of the golden bullet for us, and I'm sure that's true for lots of councils. In fact, I've been contacted by tens of councils across the country saying, can you let us know whether you're succeeding with your kind of recruitment challenge, because we've got the same challenge. But we could never measure that in 3 months. Now, ideally, we might have started with a year trial, but actually we felt that that was too risky because it was the first trial in the public sector, and we didn't feel that it was fair to ask members to support a year-long trial. So we started with the 3 months to see, can we run the council functionally? Is our performance maintained for 3 months? And if so, then should we go on to do a further trial, during which we test recruitment? And just as we've got measures for, during the first trial about KPIs and health and wellbeing, we'll have measures for recruitment and retention as well, because, estimates in the academic press that I read are that it can be anything up to 150% of somebody's annual salary to recruit and replace them, just because of the cost of recruitment, the disruption, the need to get up to speed. And so it's not efficient to have, lots of people that you're recruiting all the time. So that's, I suppose, an explanation for why we really need to do a year-long trial. I don't think realistically anybody is going to see a council that's doing a 3-month trial and say, oh, I'll join them, just, on the hope that they'll do a longer trial. I think that would, probably be quite a brave move. Although anecdotally, I'm hearing that we are receiving higher numbers of job applicants, but I don't think that data is robust enough to be able to present anything because the trial's not long enough. So that's the rationale for the year-long trial. And in terms of waste, I think you're absolutely right. It's, that there are lots of ways that we should be addressing the 4-day week trial in waste, and your idea was excellent, and I'll certainly take that back to the head of waste and see whether that's something that could sort of form part of the trial, or whether there are other sort of similar things in terms of, the way that waste is collected, as well as the things that he's already looking at.
Well, thanks for that, Liz. It sounded like, the way you said it, that you always had the plan to do a year after the 3 months, because there was a bit of criticism of the 3 months as being too short. But there was no mention of the year, but now in this paper we've got the mention of a year following the 3 months. But I never knew anything about the year till these papers came out.
Would you like to respond?
So, it was always the plan to do a 3-month trial and see if it worked. Was our performance maintained, and was health and wellbeing amongst my colleagues improved? But I've always been clear that we couldn't measure recruitment during that 3 months. And if you go back to the sort of original report and the presentations that I did, which may well have got lost in the amount of data that was presented at the time, the year-long trial was always kind of
something that we would propose should the 3-month trial be successful. And obviously it's up to members to decide whether they think that's the case or not.
Councillor Davey.
Thank you, Chair. And apologies if my phone was on. I don't know what happened there, so if there's any disturbance, forgive me. I switched off. 2 comments, really. I really welcome the report and the update. And as has been said already, it appears that the initial results are very encouraging. I welcome the fact that there'll be a year-long pilot. I think to have done anything else would have been, I think, inappropriate because we've still got an awful lot to learn. And to move from 3 months to full-time, I think, would have been a mistake. So I welcome the fact that it's a year and clearly you had to do something as a result of the 3 months. And it appears that there's enough there to warrant taking things further. I think the only question I have, it's oddly enough not for you, Liz, it's for my colleagues from the Liberal Democrat benches and the Green benches, is actually about the process. On 311, we've indicated that we've got choices to make about where we take this. I could make a decision out of cycle, or it could come back to a special meeting of S&R. And I think both Councillor Anna Smith and I were very keen to ensure that this was done transparently. And clearly, if the decision was taken by me on my own, that might be less transparent than if you had the opportunity to comment. So if it is possible, Chair, I'd welcome some views from the opposition parties as to whether or not which option they would prefer, because Councillor Anna Smith has been good enough to identify that we can have a special one-off meeting, and bearing in mind the importance of this particular proposal, and therefore meeting South Cam's requirements, we think that's probably the best way forward. But I'd welcome views. Thank you very much, Chair.
I want to deal with my own question next, if I may. And that is, looking at this, I'm a bit concerned. You will understand that our main concern will be to look at the position for our staff and our joint service. Services, 2 services, one of which has not actually been trialled yet, the waste service. The trial that has been, the service that has been trialled is the planning service, and I'm a bit concerned that by putting it all into one set of data with everything else, we're forgetting that perhaps planning is more complicated than many of the other jobs that are being provided. In that, if you're in the department collecting in the council tax and rents, it's pretty much the same all year round. But planning, it's different every time you open a new application. It's a different matter. It has to be given a different assessment. And I'm a bit concerned that for instance, the weekly surveying is blind. We don't know which department is responding. I was wondering whether we should ask for our staff to be specifically questioned as to how they think it's going. Because what I'm hearing is they're not very much liking it. And I think we need to get to the bottom of that. Because if we've got staff who are not actually being able to do the work in 4 days, then that's a problem. We need to identify it before we get to the end, or before we even extend it, I think. So is there something along these lines that can be arranged?
So absolutely. If I could just refer you again to the Health and Wellbeing Survey that's being carried out, which will be launched later this week, will be open for 3 weeks. In that survey, you identify which service you come from. And so we will have data that compares people from the planning survey and how they fed back in August and how they're now feeding back. Now that's focused on the health and well-being of colleagues, but the extra questions that we've put into that survey do ask questions like, did you manage to complete your work on time? If the trial were extended, would you want to continue to be in the trial? And so it has specific things about the 4-day week. So yes, we will be able to analyse data by service as long as there are 8 or more people in the service. So in order to avoid identifying individuals, it needs to be grouped up into 8 people, which of course the planning service is. In parts of the planning service will be able to drill down, for example, into development management or built and natural environment planning policy. We should be able to drill down into all of those, assuming 8 people from each service, at least 8 people respond. The check-in survey that I've got there in Appendix 2, or B, I can't remember what it's called, is very much testing the temperature of the organisation. And we did not want, not being polling experts, to start collecting sophisticated data during that survey, which would identify where people were from. We wanted people to be able to respond anonymously so that they could tell us exactly how they felt without worrying, that we didn't have the kind of safety net in place that the external company who's running the survey for us does have in place. So we will certainly understand more about the detailed responses that come back from planning. But one thing that I'd add is that we've been really clear throughout the trial, is that if people genuinely don't want to continue in the trial, they don't have to. There's absolutely no requirement on people to be in the trial. And it may be the case that some people get to the end of the trial and they say, do you know what, actually I like working 5 days a week. I don't have anything pressing that I want to do on an extra day off, and I'd prefer to go back to a 5-day week work pattern. And evidence from other companies who've tried 4-day weeks shows that somewhere around 10% of people do say that. And that's a perfectly acceptable position that we fully support. So there's nothing to stop people opting out of the trial if they want to. What we're keen to do, and you, a couple of councillors have alluded to people not being able to do their work in time. What we're keen to do is to provide the appropriate support to those colleagues who want to continue, want to be able to do a 4-day week, that are struggling. And we've actually launched some workshops starting next week to provide, for people to be able to opt into, to provide support to them about how they might be able to become more productive. So I'd say most people who are in the trial have been resourceful and shared information amongst each other and their teams, and have found really innovative ways of becoming more productive. Some people need a bit more support than that. And so we are keen to provide that support so that people feel that they do want to be in the trial but are struggling. We help them there.
Did you confirm that people could opt out, but only at the end of the trial? I didn't quite look.
I think one person has already opted out of the trial for personal reasons that aren't to do with the 4-day week. So that's the only person that I'm aware of so far.
But it is something you offer. I didn't realise it was an option.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Councillor Smith, you wanted to ask something?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think the survey data that's presented to us is insufficiently comprehensive, because essentially the two authorities are working together as a joint local planning authority, not in legal terms, but in effective terms. And we're funding a service that needs to deliver outcomes for the development industry, for the communities. And therefore our concern must be about the continuous improvement in the performance of that service. So that's measured by government against a raft of key performance indicators. And some of those key performance indicators are absolutely critical if we are to retain local democratic control over the service. If we fail against one or more of those, then we're at risk of being put into special measures, and this is happening to local planning authorities elsewhere, which would be a disaster. So what I want to see in the next round of survey data is not just, did I get my work completed? It's, did I trade the quality of this work to complete it in time? So we need to know whether we're still on a trajectory of continuous improvement. Now, Chief Executive shared with me an ambition that he wants to be the best council. And I think that's right. I want to see the best local planning authority. We're in agreement. We want to be held up as a very highly rated council. And so I think it's really important that this work
these surveys help to give us indications of whether this is helping us to progress towards those goals, and not just focus on these rather limited measures. It's insufficient for us to be able to make a decision about whether this is going to work. I think the other thing as well we need to take into account is about culture and that work culture, and whether those ambitions about being a high-performing local authority is reflected in everything that everybody does in the service. Also, that we need to understand that in parallel with all of this, there is a comprehensive transformation programme going on in the service, a lot of that reliant on digitalisation, improving workflows, but also the development of the partnerships we have across all the other services and statutory consultees, which all, when they're working together, mean that we can improve the service and be more effective. So it won't just be the 4-day week that's a factor in this. There's culture and there's the effect of the service transformation as well to take into account. It's a complex mixture, and we mustn't draw the wrong conclusions from impartial or fully not uncomprehensive data. No, not sufficient data for us to be able to distinguish between what's working and what isn't working. It's complex, not simple like was being presented to us.
Councillor Scott.
Thank you. I'd just like to endorse what both Councillor Smart and Councillor Robertson, thank you, Chair, said. That is that I too have had feedback that's not positive from people who are working on this program. But there's 2 points that I'd like to raise. One is it's not just the workers that need to be taken into account in this, it's the residents too. Because with the shared planning service, I have to emphasise, I've had really good communications from planning officers. I must put that on record. At the same time, if somebody, or say a resident, sends in a query and they don't get a response, and then they send in another query, and their query goes in on Thursday, and they get a response back from a number of people, which I've seen, saying, we're away, we won't be back until Monday. Now that means the resident is waiting Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday to get the response. And that's not positive, because they then feel angry towards the workers in the planning division. And therefore, my question really is everybody taking the Friday off? Is everybody taking the Monday off? Because either side of the weekend, it means that people, residents, are waiting a much lengthier time than ordinarily would hope would be the case.
I think we understand that. Do you want to ask any further question?
Well, this is my question.
Okay.
That if you interrupted me, I actually would have finished in very short compass, and this seems to happen all the time with respect. The other point that I would like to make is that with the waste service, that would have been the excellent service to begin with, because they have Monday holidays that they have no control over. Therefore, there are weeks that they have 4 days. And it seems to me that it would have been far better, in my opinion at least, to start off with them. And you see, there is a class implication here, because the management and so forth have been put on the 4-day week. These other people who are working on the ground haven't. Now the contention is that they will be put into it, but it doesn't lead to positive relations between work groups and workers, and there is this implication that people in management and people in desk jobs are being privileged over people who are out there on the ground doing equally important work. And I emphasise that work of rubbish collection is absolutely essential to public health and to everybody in the community. And I think it's a real pity it didn't start with them.
I think you'll find they do work a 5-day week. They work Tuesday to Saturday when there's a Monday off. Anyway.
Precisely, but then everything has to be rejigged.
Sorry I interrupted you. Oh, Councillor, do you want to answer any of the statements?
Yeah, if I may, Chair, because there were some questions in there. So going back to Councillor Smith, I've never made any bones about the fact that the information that we're able to present at the moment is not robust. I've been really clear about that. I've said that today, that we're waiting for the robust data to come through that will be analysed by the Bennett Institute in April to present robust information in May. Had I not presented anything to you for 3 months, I think you would have rightly said, what is going on? We don't know what's happening. We've got no information. And so all I've been able to do, Councillor Smith, is provide the information that I have, which is kind of proxy information on key performance indicators for planning, which, as you know what the planning performance indicators are, and they're all set out on page 90. I absolutely agree with you that quality of work is what matters. And I'm proud that the planning service has vastly improved its service delivery in the last year, with support from the member board and you on that. The service regularly wins awards now. They've won a large amount of money from DLUC to do some digital transformation. That I regularly speak to people in Whitehall who take our planning service very seriously because it's a serious planning service. And I certainly wouldn't want the 4-day week to jeopardise that. But the issue that we've always had in planning is that we couldn't hold on to people. We hemorrhaged people to the private sector. And, you, colleagues in the room, rightly said to me, what are you doing about all of these agency staff? And so, this is, I suppose, this is our kind of end position. This is where we got to. We did lots of things and nothing kind of touched the edges, particularly in terms of the planning service. So that's where we are. Really interesting point about culture, Councillor Smith. I would say in the last 6 months since we announced the trial, we have done more transformation in the council than we have done in the last 3.5 years. And I say that kind of, I've said that openly, I've said it to my colleagues. And the reason why is because people have got some real agency in this. People now, if people want to become more productive so that a year-long trial is likely to be the next step, if they want to work for an organisation which offers them this incredible benefit, that they need to become more productive. And so I've seen transformation that we've tried and tried for years to deliver, which now is kind of being delivered, almost overnight by people who suddenly feel like they're really invested in it. So that's something that I wasn't expecting and has been very, very powerful for us as an organisation. Councillor Scott, in terms of the feedback from people that you've had that it's not positive, don't get me wrong, I haven't said everything is positive. Other members tonight have said it all looks very positive, but I've been really careful not to say that because it isn't positive for everybody. Some people have really struggled. And as I mentioned to Councillor Robertson, we're putting in support for those people so that the people who have struggled but want to be able to do the 4-day week have more support to do so. I completely agree with you about about the importance of residents, and it is an issue about if somebody isn't in on a Friday. Interestingly, I think our standards in South Cambs are that you need to apply to a resident within 14 days. Now, generally, we're much quicker than that. But I think what wasn't happening before was if somebody wasn't in on a Friday, they didn't necessarily have an out of office on, and so they didn't have this kind of announcement that we're trialling the 4-day week. And I imagine that is frustrating to residents. Frankly, it's frustrating to me some of the time when I kind of want to contact someone on a Friday. But the good thing is that I've had feedback from some members that actually they found it easier to contact people when they're not in, because there's always a named person on the email that says, I'm not in on this day,
and if you need to contact someone urgently, please contact this person. So in the main, that has worked quite positively for people. For example, for today, I had a query on some of the data. My colleague wasn't in. I contacted the person that he named, and I got the answer within an hour. So I'm not saying it's perfect, Councillor Scott, but change is always hard. And I think, you know, we need to understand the bigger picture in terms of, do the benefits of the change outweigh the negatives? And I'm not for 1 minute saying that there aren't any negatives. I agree that it, you know, would have been great to trial waste first, but waste has been way more complicated to do the analysis of that trial in preparation for doing it, largely because we had to do an entire round optimization exercise, which has taken months and is really complex. You know, in the same way that, you know, I can ask desk-based colleagues to change the way that they work, it is not possible to ask people who collect bins, which frankly I think is one of the most important jobs that we do in the council, to change the way that they do it, because individually they don't have a lot of option to change what they're doing. So we've had to take a completely different approach to that trial in terms of looking at how can we as a management of that service reorganise things so that people could do a 4-day-week trial. So that's why we didn't start with waste. I've answered all the questions.
You got Councillor Bennett on the coming in from the Teams link. Would you like to ask your question or make your statement?
Thank you, Chair. One of the things I wanted to comment on is Councillor Davies' question about options. I would prefer a special meeting. Second thing is to say that we've talked quite a bit in this meeting about our role as councillors, as users and consumers of a products of planning service. However, we also have a role in how we could assist a 4-day-week trial. And I think it would be useful to have a planning regulatory committee meeting to actually discuss that. For example, if there's a problem on staff turnover, then that's going to be exacerbated if people have a very long wait for their planning application to be heard. Whether we could meet more often and speed up smaller planning applications, whether we have the right criteria for what gets heard at planning regulatory and what gets decided by officers, are things that I don't know the answers to, but I do think these are questions that should be asked. And I'd like to see a much more proactive approach from my fellow councillors about supporting this trial, which is really the only thing that South Cams have been able to do to react to their recruitment crisis, and is something that Cambridge City Council may be forced to consider very soon itself. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Carling.
Thank you very much. Yes, just to add on to the kind of points that were made earlier about data, I completely understand about sort of why we don't have the in-depth data right now, but just to give a couple of things that I think it will be useful to see when we do get that come forward. I'd like to see the numbers of applications that are being appealed for non-determination from the planning service and how that's changing over time, because anecdotally I'm noticing quite a lot of that recently since the trials come in, and it'd be interesting to see whether my anecdotal observations are being borne out by kind of the evidence. I think some inter-year comparisons would be useful as well. And also, just in general, an analysis of the time for completion of an application, sort of when it comes in to when it's done. I think those are going to be really useful metrics that help us to kind of, in the decision-making process, because I think just the kind of the KPIs of the numbers completed is useful, but it doesn't tell the whole story, if that makes sense. I had a particular query that I've gained from sort of that I've come up with from conversations with staff, which seems to be that at the start of the trial, and please correct me if I'm wrong here, it looks like people were given quite a lot of flexibility over which day of the week to take off, but a directive came in late December saying that actually it should be Monday or Friday. And if that is true, I'd just be interested to hear kind of what the justification was for that, because I think that comes into a lot of what Councillor Scott was saying before in terms of having issues contacting people on a Friday. And I'm just wondering why kind of that was almost people were encouraged to take a Friday or a Monday off, if indeed that happened. Thank you.
This can take Councillor Smart's questions and trying to wrap this up.
Interesting, isn't it? We all want to chat about it. It's very interesting, Liz. So just to finish, and from me, thanks for letting me come back again, Chair. So, and I appreciate your contributions, Liz, and the fact you keep coming back to us for criticism, so thank you. As you can see, I continue to be perplexed. So, and I understand the history, and you know, the 7-day week, the 6-day week, 5-day week, and why not a 4-day week, and so on. So, and I understand from my experience, especially of the planning department in both councils, or one council, whichever you want to call it, the problems there and people going to Bidwells to work instead, and they're nice, attractive offices and possibly more money, I suspect. And that's my point. So, were staff asking for a 4-day week? Did exit interviews say that they really needed a 4-day week? Or is this something that you've cooked up, Liz? The bottom line for me is the bottom line. So we live in a market economy with money as a medium of exchange. In all conversations I've had with people about work, and I mean work, you know, you do something not because you want to do it, but just because you need to do it. It's about the money, the wages, the salary, not how many hours or days you work. So where do you sit with all of that? Isn't it about the money, the salary? Don't you pay planners more money if you want planners to stay?
Councillor Anna Smith, you wanted to ask something.
Yeah, it was just a brief comment, but really to echo, thank you for coming and facing this scrutiny, because you come frequently and we always ask you a lot of questions. And we ask you those questions because actually all of us in this room share that commitment to getting it right for our residents and getting it right for our staff. And I'm really appreciative that everybody in this room shares that core commitment. I just wanted to zoom out a little bit and say that in all the questions we're asking, also to remember that this is a really important experiment. And the 4-day week has been, as I think we've said before, a commitment of the Labour Party for some time. It's a bold thing to be doing. And we don't have all the answers yet, and we do all appreciate that. We are going to keep asking you questions about it, but I'm sure that's what you would expect. But we're really, really interested to see more and to see those reports as they come through. And like Councillor Davey, I'm personally supportive of a longer trial. I think it's a really helpful thing because we don't have all the answers we need yet. And as Councillor Davey said, to go immediately from 3 months to permanent feels quite a big jump. So thank you for keep coming to us. We will keep asking you questions, but this is a really, really important project. So we're looking forward to hearing more in due course.
Do you want to make a response to that? And then we'll come on to the question of the options.
Okay, thank you. So, Councillor Culling, on those 3 KPIs, we should be able to provide all of those. I think 2 are standard anyway, but the 3rd shouldn't be a problem. And in terms of, the day of the week, we did originally say you can take any day off. It became apparent relatively quickly that was going to be quite hard logistically to manage in terms of people needing to be in regular meetings, knowing when somebody was in the office. And so for the trial, we took advice from people who had undertaken 4-day weeks in other places and said, okay, for the 3-month trial, we'll just do Monday or Friday, which means that you've got a core Tuesday to Thursday when you know you can expect people to be in the office. I think that advice came out late November, but I'm not sure. I think the jury's out on whether that would be what we do going forward, and I'm looking forward to receiving feedback from colleagues and also from members and people who haven't been in the trial about that particular thing. So if you have, kind of strong views about that, please make sure you do feed them back to us. Councillor Smart, to my knowledge, nobody asked me for a 4-day week, but I think they maybe wouldn't have expected that as a council, we would even have entertained the idea, because it is, as Councillor Smith said, very bold and not without risk. That the idea was kind of raised in a local government association workshop at the annual conference last July, when I think I may have discussed this before, there was a very, very depressing conversation about how everybody was struggling with workforce, and somebody in the audience said, is the 4-day week the answer? And that's kind of what inspired my leader. So no, it didn't come from my colleagues. And I can't read my own writing here. Oh, salary is important, not hours. Interestingly, if you look at the report that the 4-day week Global published on the 60 companies in the private sector who undertook a trial, they published that report probably about a month ago. A surprising number of people said that they wouldn't move from a 4-day week to a 5-day week employee, even if they were paid a lot more. So I don't think salary is the only thing that people care about. I think people, particularly younger people, really care about their quality of life. And I think the 4-day week is potentially, a solution that kind of delivers that. And thank you, Councillor Smith, for your comments. There's nothing that I like more than coming and being challenged by you, because it holds me to account, and it's really important. If I can't answer your questions, then I shouldn't be the kind of senior responsible officer leading the project. So I'm more than happy to come as frequently as you like.
Now, there's the question of, in 311, giving the options as to if the report is available in time to have a meeting or a decision by chair and spokes. I have a straw poll on this as to which you want to do. Those who would prefer to have an extra meeting, you put your hands up. Those who...
That was 4, Chair.
Yeah. Those against that, we want to go for these chair and spokes? No. And those who are abstaining? 2. Right, okay, well, there's a straw poll for you. If I take you to the recommendations on page 83, to note the report and to pass the message back that generally people want to have an extra meeting rather than have it taken in a non-public way. Okay, so is that agreed? Yeah. Councillor Davey, do you wish to comment on that?
No, I'm happy to take forward that. I was really in the hands of the committee, and I think it's a more transparent approach, so thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Right. We're now going to jump to the last item, because otherwise we would have to exclude the press and public. The last item is the work of the external partnerships. And are you introducing this, Anna, or is it?
Andrew.
Andrew,
I think I do
course.
this one, don't I? Is that right?
Andrew, would you like to introduce this item, and then Anna can contribute?
Yeah, I'll be very brief, Chair. Thank you. It's our annual report on the strategic partnerships, the ones that report for the portfolios that come to this committee. So it covers the Greater Cambridge Partnership, Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Combined Authority, and the new Oxford-Cambridge and Regional Partnership. I hope it gives the committee useful information, and I'd have to take any questions.
Shall we go straight to questions?
Happy to go straight to questions. I've also got some feedback I can give on the last CPCA board meeting, which I think is not in this paper, if that would be helpful for the committee to hear some of that.
Questions then? Anybody got any questions about the external partnerships? No. Okay. Nobody online? No. Right. That's it then. We'll take you to the recommendations then. Sorry.
I thought Anna was going to add something, but if I may.
Do, if you want to ask a question, do.
Yeah, okay. It's not so much as a question. It is actually about the report that went to the last meeting of the Audit and Governance Committee. And it set out in quite some detail the improvements that need to be made by the authority to satisfy the criticisms that were set out by the external auditor in the letter of the 1st of June and subsequently by the DULUC in their best value letter. The officers have undertaken not just a textual analysis of those letters, but they followed them up with detailed discussions with the parties to actually pin down exactly what it is they want to see the combined authority do. This, in my experience being on the combined authority for the last few months, is the first time we've had absolute clarity about what these two main stakeholders want from the combined authority and from the improvement board. So I think it's actually a major milestone that's worth noting, because I think now, at least I'm very confident that the combined authority can move forward to satisfying the government and restoring the government's confidence in the combined authority and turning back on the funding, which is critical to the whole purpose and objectives of having the combined authority. So I think it's really good news, and I just wanted to share that with you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that is very good news. And so I got a little bit of ribbing from the press for saying that I welcomed the best value notice in terms of the fact that it confirmed what the combined authority already knew it was working on, but to have that external confirmation of that was actually incredibly helpful. So I would absolutely stick with that. I think that clarity from DLUC and the clarity that we've had from the beginning of the work with the Improvement Board has been incredibly helpful. There's been a lot of very strong and very hard work going on in the combined authority. And I do want to pay tribute to the interim officer team who have done a lot of work on that. That is absolutely not to undermine at all the work of the officer team who have been there right from the start and who have been working very hard all the way through. But the group of interim officers that have come in to help us steer through a very difficult period have done some really, really excellent work on this, on improvement, on governance. One of the things I would have said if I'd been introducing the report would have been to highlight the fact that there has been an appointment of a new chief executive made. That name is still not in the public domain, but it's a very good appointment, and again, just a sign that the combined authority is moving forward. But I'd want to pay tribute at this point, therefore, to Gordon Mitchell, who is the interim chief executive and has really spearheaded a lot of this work.
That's Davey.
Yeah, yes, an unusual statement, I think. It's just really to express our thanks and gratitude to Councillor Anna Smith for all her work in representing the City Council over the last 3 to 4 months while Nick Johnson's been away, and I think it's only right that we should formally record that and express our gratitude for that work which she's taken on in addition to being the leader of this council. So thank you, Anna, for all you've done. Much appreciated. Thank you, Chair.
You beat me to it. I was going to say much the same. But a successful 3 months of work, I would say, particularly getting the precept agreed. So
Could I also put on record our welcome back to Dr. Nick as well? It's good that he's back to full health, and I look forward to working with him as his deputy in months and years ahead, hopefully.
Great, thank you. Recommendations are to note, we've already got the update. So everybody happy with the recommendations? Okay, they're accepted unanimously, I think. Councillor Davey? Oh, no, it's Councillor Smith. Do you accept the report?
I do, thank you.
Do you accept the report? Yeah. Okay, so now we're going to move to item 8, which requires us to exclude the press and public. The report mentions that the appendix of the report relates to the information. In fact, it's not correct. The report itself is subject to confidential rules. So as long as you're accepting that, are you in favour of excluding the press and public? Can I see all those in favour of excluding the press and public? Okay. Well, it's not unanimous, but she's...
Can I see that one more time, please?
Oh, that's right. We don't vote on that from the end, I forgot.
That's 4, Chair.
And those against? Those abstaining? One abstention, thank you. Right, so we now remove the public connection. We're now offline, okay? Oh, Teams is online, so the officers can contribute, but the public cannot be aware of what's going on. Councillor Bennett is treated as not a member of the public, as a councillor.